A lone woman on the frontier, Jocelyn Biddle, finds a man bleeding out in the dust of the Arizona Territory. He is an Apache warrior, the most feared and hated enemy in the territory. To help him is treason. To leave him is murder. She makes a choice that will cost her everything, dragging him to safety as the sun bleeds out of the sky. But as dawn breaks, the man she saved isn't just an enemy. He's a mystery. And he swears an oath of loyalty that will plunge them both into a war for their very souls, against a man who wears a badge and a secret that will burn the desert down. The wind in the Dragoon Mountains didn't just howl, it scoured. It took the paint off wood, the hope from a heart, and the moisture from a body in minutes. Jocelyn Biddle understood this wind. It was her only constant companion at the Broken Jay Ranch, a patch of hard, unforgiving dust her late husband, Henry Biddle, had called paradise. Now it was just her inheritance, a collection of debt, drought, and loneliness. She was checking the southern fence line, a stretch of barbed wire that sagged more than it stood, when the dust storm hit. It came on fast, a churning wall of grit that turned midday into midnight. Jocelyn pulled her neckerchief over her nose, the coarse fabric scratching her chapped lips, and hunkered behind a cluster of ocotillo. She was tough, but she wasn't foolish. This storm was a killer. It passed as quickly as it came, leaving the world in a strange, orange-hued silence. And in that silence, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A low, rasping groan, like stone grinding stone. Her hand went instantly to the Colt revolver on her hip, a weapon Henry had insisted she carry, though she was a better shot with the Winchester rifle now slung across her back. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice stolen by the first breeze of the storm's exit. She moved slowly, tracking the sound. Behind a sun-scorched boulder, she found him. Her breath hitched. Apache. He was sprawled on his front, one arm pinned beneath him, the other stretched out, as if reaching for a life that had already abandoned him. His buckskin leggings were torn and dark with blood. A deep, wet stain saturated his left shoulder, pulsing slowly. He was young, but built with the lean, hard muscle of a predator. His black hair was matted with blood, dust, and something that looked like pine sap. Josie's mind raced, a cacophony of warnings. This was the enemy. The men who raided settlements. The reason Fort Grant kept a full patrol. The recent bloody incident at the Cienega Crossing, where a mail wagon had been found with its occupants slaughtered, flashed in her mind. Helping him was not just foolish, it was treason. They hanged women for less. She should leave, fire 3 shots, as she'd been instructed, and let the cavalry handle it. She watched him. He shuddered, a full-body tremor, and let out another of those agonizing groans. He wasn't a warrior now. He was just a man, dying in the dirt, same as any other. The same as Henry had, after the wagon tongue crushed his chest. Dying was dying. "Damn it," she whispered to the wind. "Damn it all." She knelt, her knees cracking. She rolled him over. His face was angular, strong-jawed, and streaked with ceremonial paint, now smeared by sweat. His eyes were closed, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle. The wound in his shoulder was a puckered, angry hole. A bullet. Not a recent one either. It was festering. She couldn't carry him. He was a solid mass of muscle, and she was worn thin by grief and labor. But she couldn't leave him. She unslung her rifle. She looked at his face, then at the revolver in her hand. It would be a mercy. 1 shot. Clean. She raised the pistol, her hand shaking. His eyelids fluttered. He wasn't conscious, not really, but in that flicker of movement, she saw a person. "Not a problem." "No," she spat, holstering the weapon. "Not like this." She grabbed him under the arms. He was heavier than a side of beef. She couldn't lift, so she dragged. She dug her heels into the rocky soil and pulled. It was a foot, then another. Her lungs burned. Her arms screamed. He was dead weight, a sack of broken bones and hot fever. She didn't dare take him to the main house, too exposed. Instead, she angled toward the old line shack, a half-collapsed adobe structure Henry had used for lambing, hidden in a small arroyo 200 yards away. It felt like 2 miles. She dragged him, her boots slipping, her own sweat blinding her. Twice she had to stop, leaning against a rock, her chest heaving, convinced she was going to have a heart attack. But she looked at his still form, at the flies already gathering on his wound, and she found a new well of stubbornness. When she finally pulled him over the threshold of the shack, the sun was a bloody smear on the horizon. She collapsed onto the dirt floor beside him, her entire body a single throbbing ache. She had carried an injured Apache. The full weight of her decision settled on her, heavier than the man himself. She had just signed her own death warrant. The inside of the shack was rank with the smell of old wool and pack rat droppings. There was a rusted cot, a broken table, and precious little else. Josie, running on a fuel she didn't know she possessed, worked by the dim light of a single kerosene lamp. The first priority was the wound. She tore open his buckskin shirt. The flesh around the bullet hole was puffy, discolored, and hot to the touch. The infection was spreading. If she didn't get the lead out, he'd be dead by morning. "This is going to hurt you a lot more than it hurts me," she muttered, though her voice was shaking. She found Henry's old metal flask in her saddlebag, the one filled with cheap whiskey. She poured a splash over the wound. The man, deep in his delirium, arched off the cot with a silent scream, his body going rigid. "Hold still," she hissed, though he couldn't hear. She took her smallest, sharpest skinning knife and held the blade in the lamp's flame until it glowed cherry red. She took a deep breath, said a prayer to a god she wasn't sure was listening anymore, and plunged the hot knife into the wound. He convulsed. A guttural sound tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that chilled her to the bone. His good hand shot out and gripped her wrist. His strength was terrifying. Even half dead, he could snap her arm. "Let go!" she gasped, trying to pry his fingers off. His eyes snapped open. They weren't black, as she'd expected, but a deep, dark brown, burning with fever and a feral intensity. He looked right at her, through her. He didn't see a person. He saw a threat. "I am helping," she ground out, her free hand still holding the knife in his flesh. He stared at her for a long, agonizing second. The tension held, a string pulled taut. Then, as if a puppet's strings had been cut, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into unconsciousness again, his grip loosening. Josie let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, her forehead slick with sweat. She went back to work. She probed, dug, and finally, with a sickening click, she felt the knife tip hit the flattened piece of lead. She prized it out, a ragged, ugly chunk of metal. She spent the next hour cleaning the wound with the last of the whiskey and stitching it shut with a rusty needle and thread from her mending kit. It was a butcher's job, but it was done. She bandaged him with strips torn from her own petticoat, the last piece of respectable clothing she owned. She sat on the floor, her back against the rough adobe wall, and watched him. His fever raged. He thrashed, whispering words in a language she didn't understand, harsh, clipped syllables of panic and grief. She bathed his face with a damp rag, pushing his matted hair back from his forehead. He had a scar on his jawline, thin and white. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, the quality of light in the shack had changed. The first, thin, grey fingers of dawn were creeping through the cracks in the wall, and he was watching her. His eyes were clear. The fever had not broken, but the delirium had receded. He was awake, and he was assessing. He looked at the shack, at the lamp, at the bloody rag in her hand, and then at her face. Josie froze. This was the moment. The warrior was back. He could kill her with his one good hand. He tried to sit up, a grimace of pain twisting his features. She didn't move, didn't reach for her gun. She just watched him. He pushed himself up onto his good elbow. His gaze was heavy, searching. He looked at the fresh stitches, the clean bandage. He looked at the discarded, bloody knife. He put the pieces together. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand, palm open. A sign of peace. Josie, her heart hammering, slowly mirrored the gesture. He spoke. His voice was a dry rasp, but it held a strange power. "You did this." It was a statement, not a question. His English was broken but clear. "I did," Josie said, her own voice hoarse. "They hunt me," he said. "I know. You are white. I am Apache. I know that too." He stared at her, a long, unblinking appraisal that seemed to peel back the layers of her soul. He was looking for the deceit, the trap. He found none. He saw only a woman, exhausted and streaked with his own blood. He pushed himself to a sitting position, a monumental effort that left him trembling. He looked out the single, small window toward the new sun, which was just beginning to crest the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. He turned back to her. The morning light caught the planes of his face. "At the dark hour," he said, his voice gaining strength, "you found me. You fought the death spirit. You gave me back my life." He shuffled, wincing, and swung his legs off the cot. Before Josie could react, he was on his knees on the dirt floor, his head bowed. "It is the law," he said, his voice resonant. "A life for a life. You saved what my enemies tried to take." He looked up, and his eyes locked on hers. The intensity of his gaze was a physical force. "My life is now a shadow to your light. Where you walk, I follow. When you are in danger, I am the shield. When you are threatened, I am the blade. My life is yours, until the debt is paid." He lowered his forehead to the dirt floor at her feet. Jocelyn Biddle stared at the top of his head. She had heard of such things, life debts, oaths. She had thought they were stories. He wasn't thanking her. He was binding himself to her. She had wanted to save a man's life, not own it. She had carried an injured Apache on her back, and in return he had just laid the entire weight of his life, his honor, and his future at her feet. She was terrified. "Get up," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Sunrise is here, and you've just brought a whole new kind of trouble with it." For 2 days the line shack was a self-contained world of pain and silence. Josie brought water and a thin broth she made from jerky. The warrior, who she learned was named Coda, never spoke unless spoken to. He watched. He watched the way she moved, the way she handled her rifle, the way she scanned the horizon before slipping back inside the shack. He was healing at a rate that seemed unnatural, his fever breaking on the second night. Josie, for her part, was living on a knife's edge. Every crackle of a branch, every distant call of a hawk, sent her hand flying to her gun. She was harboring a fugitive, not just an Apache, but, as Coda had admitted in a brief, clipped exchange, a warrior. On the third morning, her worst fears rode up her long, dusty drive. She saw the dust plume from the shack's window, and her blood ran cold. 2 riders. One she recognized instantly, Deputy Emmett Shaw. "Don't make a sound," she hissed at Coda, grabbing her rifle. "Don't breathe, don't exist." She burst from the shack, deliberately not looking back, and strode toward the main house, intercepting them as if she'd just been checking her stores. Emmett Shaw was a man who enjoyed his authority. He was tall, with a thick neck and a handlebar mustache that was always meticulously waxed, even in this heat. He sat his horse with a lazy arrogance, his silver badge the brightest thing about him. The man with him was Bartholomew Bart Higgins, a local rancher with small, porcine eyes who had been trying to buy the Broken Jay for pennies on the dollar ever since Henry died. "Mornin', Mrs. Biddle," Shaw said, his voice a smooth, oily drawl. He spat a stream of tobacco juice, narrowly missing her boot. "You're looking peaky, Jocelyn. This wilderness not treatin' you right?" "It's Mrs. Biddle," Josie said, her knuckles white on the Winchester. "What do you want, deputy?" Shaw chuckled, a sound with no humor in it. He leaned on his saddle horn. "Just making my rounds, checking on our vulnerable citizens. A widow, all alone out here. It's a dangerous place." "I manage," Josie said flatly. Higgins spoke up, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Land's dry, Biddle. Seen your cows. They're all skin and bone. You'd be better off selling. My offer still stands." "My land isn't for sale, Higgins. Not now, not ever." Shaw held up a hand. "Now, Bart, let the lady have her pride. Sides, we're on official business." He squinted at her, his eyes cold. "We've been tracking a renegade." Josie's heart felt like it stopped. "Oh?" "Yes, sir," Shaw said, pulling a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. "An Apache buck, part of that band that hit the Kenega wagon. We think he's wounded. A patrol clipped him near the pass." He took a bite, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thing is, we tracked him this far. Right onto your property, Mrs. Biddle. Blood trail petered out right by your south fence." Josie forced her face to remain impassive. "I've seen nothing." "You sure about that?" Shaw pressed. "He's dangerous, Jocelyn. Killed 2 men over at the Silver S mining rig just before the massacre. Cut 'em up bad. There's a $500 bounty on his head. Dead or alive. $500. More money than Josie had seen in her life. "I haven't seen anyone, Apache or otherwise," she repeated, her voice a little too stiff. Shaw's eyes narrowed. He dismounted, his spurs jingling, and walked slowly toward her. He was deliberately invading her space, a power play. He stopped so close she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You know," he whispered, harboring a fugitive. "Especially a red-skin fugitive. That's a hanging offense. They'd take this ranch so fast your head would spin. They'd give it to the man who brought you in. A man like me, perhaps." He let the threat hang in the air. From the corner of her eye, Josie saw him, a flicker of movement at the line shack's window. Coda. He was watching. Shaw's gaze drifted past her, toward her water trough. "You're drawing a lot of water lately, for one woman." "My horse was sick," Josie lied, her voice shaking. Shaw walked over to the trough. He dipped his hand in the water, then looked at the ground. He pointed with his boot. "And what's this?" Josie's stomach dropped. There in the mud was a single dark drop of something. It was too dark to be water. Shaw knelt. He dipped his finger in the spot and rubbed it. He looked at his fingers. "That's a nasty cut you've got, Mrs. Biddle," he said, standing up, his eyes glittering. "You should be more careful. Bleeding all over your own yard." He turned and mounted his horse. Higgins was looking at her with open suspicion. "You see anything?" Shaw said, his voice hard as iron. "You fire 3 shots. We'll be at the Silver S rig, questioning the witnesses. Don't make me regret my professional courtesy, Jocelyn." He and Higgins wheeled their horses around and trotted away. Josie didn't breathe until they were out of sight. She ran to the trough. It wasn't a drop of blood. It was a dark, oily smudge. She looked at her hands, then at the shack. Twist. Shaw hadn't seen a drop of blood. He'd seen a smudge of gun oil. He hadn't been looking at the trough. He'd been looking past it, at the line shack, and in the window, where Coda had been watching, was the glint of Josie's own rifle, the one she had left in the shack. Coda had picked it up. Shaw hadn't just been suspicious, he'd been confirming. He knew someone was in there. The drop in the mud. It was a test. He'd wiped it from his own gun, a little trap, and she'd lied, confirming his suspicion. He wasn't going to the Silver S. He was going to get a posse. And the man she was protecting. Shaw hadn't just called him a renegade. He'd called him a murderer. Josie slammed the door of the line shack, kicking a stool against it. Her hands were shaking with rage and fear. Coda was on his feet, his weight on his good leg, the Winchester held loosely in his right hand. He knew, Josie breathed, pacing the small space. He knew you were here. The gun oil. The rifle in the window. He was testing me. He is a man who hunts, Coda said, his voice low. He placed the rifle on the cot. He enjoys the game. Game? Josie rounded on him. This isn't a game. He called you a murderer. He said you killed 2 men at the Silver S before the Cienega massacre. He's coming back, Coda. He's coming back with men, and he's going to hang us both. She stopped, breathing hard, her eyes wild. Did you kill those men? Coda's face was a mask, but his eyes were filled with a cold, ancient pain. He did not flinch from her gaze. Yes, he said. The single word hit her like a physical blow. She had been harboring a killer. Everything Shaw said was true. She had risked her life, her ranch, her neck for a man who butchered miners. Get out, she whispered, her voice trembling. I cannot. What? She screamed. You can't, or you won't. Get out. Take your oath and your honor, and get off my land before you get me killed. I cannot leave, he repeated, his voice tight with a new emotion. Not until I tell you. Tell me what? More lies? More half-truths? The men at the Silver S, he said, his voice dropping. They were not miners. They were slavers, whiskey runners who traded in more than just liquor. Josie paused. What are you talking about? 2 moons ago, Coda said, a small group from my band went to the Gila Trail to trade. They did not return. We searched. We found what was left. The men killed. The women gone. He looked away, his jaw working. One of the women was Nita. Nita? My sister, he said. The word was raw, a fresh wound. Josie's anger began to curdle into a sick, cold dread. I tracked them, Coda continued, his voice a dead monotone. I am a good tracker. I tracked them to the Silver S rig. It is a dead mine. They used it as a way station to hold their cargo. He looked at her, and the mask was gone. His face was a landscape of pure, undiluted grief. I waited for night. I went in. I found her, Nita, and 2 other women from the Pima tribe. They were broken, used. Josie closed her eyes. I freed them. We were almost clear, but one of the men, he heard us. There were 3 of them. Drunk, they grabbed their guns. Coda's good hand clenched into a fist. They shot, wildly. Nita, she pushed me. She took the bullet meant for me. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the buzz of a fly against the dirty window. She died in my arms, he whispered. I became the night. I became the animal they say we are. I did not just kill them, I ended them. It was not a warrior's work. It was Vengeance! He sank onto the cot, his head in his hands. I took a bullet in the fight. I got the other women away, sent them east. I had nowhere to go. My band. They would not understand. Vengeance is a white man's poison. I was shamed. I was running. The patrol found my trail. The rest, you know. Josie stood in the center of the room, her world tilting. This wasn't a story of a savage killer. It was a story of a brother. A story of a loss so profound it mirrored her own. She remembered the hollowed-out feeling after Henry's death, the rage at the universe for its senseless cruelty. "Sure," she said, her voice quiet. He said you were part of the Senega massacre." Coda looked up, his eyes sharp. "No, that was after. I was already running. That was another band, a war party. I had no part in it." Josie believed him. She believed him more than she had ever believed the oily-lipped lies of Emmett Shaw. "He's not just coming back for you," she said, the pieces clicking into place. "Higgins, he wants my land. Shaw wants me." She remembered Shaw's words. They'd give it to the man who brought you in. A man like me. "This isn't about you, Coda. Not really. It's about greed. You're just the excuse, the leverage." Coda stood up. The warrior was back, but his eyes were different. They weren't cold. They were focused. "He comes to hunt," Coda said. "He thinks we are the prey." "He's bringing a posse," Josie said. "Then they will find a war," Coda replied. He picked up the Winchester. He checked the action, his movements economical and precise, despite his wounded shoulder. "You saved my life, Jocelyn Biddle. I swore to be your shield. They will not take this house. They will not take you." Josie looked at the man she had dragged from the dirt. He was not a savage. He was a brother, a protector, and now a condemned man. "They won't," Josie said, and she walked to the main house. "Because I'm not giving them the chance." She returned minutes later, her arms full. She tossed Coda a box of 40-aught caliber cartridges for the Winchester. For herself, she carried her own Colt revolver and a double-barreled shotgun. "You're the shield," she said, cracking the shotgun and loading 2 heavy brass shells. "I'm the blade." The posse didn't wait for morning. They came with the twilight, 4 riders silhouetted against the bruised purple sky. Josie and Coda weren't in the line shack. They were in the main house, a much more defensible position. It was a solid adobe structure with thick walls and small windows. 4, Coda said, peering through a crack in the shutters. The one with the badge, the pig-eyed one, and 2 others. Higgins' ranch hands, Josie identified them. Lonnie and Wade, neither is smart enough to pour water from a boot. "They do not need to be smart," Coda said. "They only need to shoot." The riders fanned out, circling the house. They were staying just outside of rifle range. "Jocelyn Biddle!" Shaw's voice boomed across the yard, falsely pleasant. "We know you're in there, and we know who you've got with you." Josie and Coda exchanged a look. They were positioned at opposite ends of the house, each covering a different angle. "Send out the Apache killer and we'll go easy on you," Shaw yelled. "A fine, maybe. A night in the cells. We're reasonable men." "He's lying," Josie muttered, her cheek pressed against the cool wood of her shotgun stock. "His tongue is forked," Coda agreed. "Last chance, widow." Shaw's voice turned ugly. "You're harboring a murderer. That's a hangin'." A shot rang out. A bullet punched through the window, sending a spray of glass across the floor. "That's your answer," Coda said, his voice calm. He raised the Winchester, aimed and fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. Outside, one of the riders, Lonnie, screamed and toppled from his horse. "Did you?" Josie gasped. "His shoulder," Coda said, already moving to another window. A wounded man is more trouble than a dead one. He needs care. Slows them down. Shaw and the others scrambled for cover. They dismounted, hiding behind the water trough and a stack of old feed barrels. The siege had begun. Gunfire erupted. They were trading shots, the sharp crack of the posse's pistols answered by the heavy boom of Josie's shotgun and the surgical thwack of Coda's Winchester. For an hour, it was chaos. Bullets tore through the thin walls of the kitchen, splintering cabinets and shattering Josie's meager collection of plates. A stray shot grazed Coda's good arm. A shallow cut he ignored. "They're trying to pin us," Josie called out, reloading her shotgun. Her hands were slick with sweat. "They'll wait till dark, then rush us or try to burn us out." "The pig-eyed one," Coda said. "He keeps looking at the barn." "The barn?" Josie's eyes went wide. My God, the dynamite. Henry, in his endless quest to improve the ranch, had bought a case of dynamite to clear a boulder-filled field. It was still there, in a locked box in the barn. "If they get that," Josie's voice trailed off. "They will not," Coda said. Before Josie could stop him, he was out the back door. He moved like a ghost, a shadow in the deepening dusk. "Coda, no!" she screamed. But he was gone. She was alone in the house. Shaw, Higgins, and Wade were still firing, providing cover for something. "Where'd he go, widow?" Shaw's voice was a taunt. "He leave you to die?" Josie fired the shotgun in the direction of his voice, more to quiet him than to hit him. She ran to the back window. She saw Higgins, keeping low, sprinting from the barrels toward the barn. He had a crowbar in his hand. He was almost there. Then a shape dropped from the roof of the woodshed. Coda. He landed on Higgins's back, a silent, brutal impact. Coda didn't have the Winchester. He had Josie's skinning knife. Higgins roared, a sound of surprise and pain. The two men rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs. Coda's wounded shoulder was a liability. Higgins was a big, strong man, fueled by greed and rage. Shaw and Wade saw it. They opened fire. Bullets kicked up dust all around the struggling men. "Cover me!" Josie yelled, though no one was there. She burst out the front door, shotgun raised, and fired both barrels toward the water trough. The spray of buckshot made Shaw and Wade duck for cover. The diversion was all Coda needed. He got the knife free. Higgins saw it, his little eyes wide with terror. "No, wait, I'll—" Coda didn't hesitate. He drew the blade across Higgins's throat. It was brutal, efficient, and final. Higgins collapsed. Coda stood over him, breathing heavily, the bloody knife in his hand. Wade, the last ranch hand, saw his boss go down. He panicked. He stood up from behind the trough, his pistol waving wildly. You killed him!" Coda, still 50 yards away, didn't even raise an arm. A shot rang out from the house. Wade's head snapped back, and he fell like a puppet with its strings cut. Josie stood on her porch, her rifle smoking. She hadn't even realized she'd dropped the shotgun and picked up the Winchester. The shot had been instinctive. A perfect, clean shot. Coda looked at her, then at Wade. A slow, terrifying silence descended on the broken jay. Lonnie was groaning by his horse. Higgins and Wade were dead. "Well, hell," Emmett Shaw's voice called out, but it was different. It was shaky. "Just hell." He stepped out from behind the water trough, his hands held high. "Don't shoot, Josie. I'm surrendering." He dropped his gun belt and kicked it away. "It was Higgins. It was all him. He made me do it. Said he'd pay off my debts. It was his plan." Josie walked slowly toward him, her rifle level. Coda moved in from the side, a silent, deadly flank. "You're a liar, Emmett," Josie said, her voice dead. "No, I swear," he babbled, his eyes wide, fixed on Coda. He's the killer, not me. I'm an officer of the law." "The law!" Josie spat. And then a new voice spoke, shattering the night. "He is right. He is the law. And that one, he is a liar." A man stepped out from behind the barn. He was not a white man. He was Apache. He was tall, dressed in a warrior's regalia, his face set in a grim mask. And he was not alone. 3 other Apache warriors fanned out behind him, their bows drawn. Coda froze. His face went pale beneath the grime. "Yiska," Coda breathed. The new Apache, Yiska, pointed a finger at Coda. "He is not Coda. He is not Indi, the people. He is Yiska, the night. He is cast out. He brings shame. He is a white man." The revelation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Josie's mind reeled. She stared at Coda, truly seeing him for the first time. The angular face, the build, the skin, dark from the sun but not. His eyes, Josie whispered, a memory surfacing from the feverish haze of the first night. She had thought them dark brown. They weren't. "Show her," Yiska commanded. Coda, or whoever he was, didn't move. He was locked in a standoff with the man called Yiska. Emmett Shaw, seeing the tide turn, started to laugh. It was a high, thin, hysterical sound. "Oh, Josie, you did all this for him?" "What is he talking about?" Josie demanded, her rifle still trained on Shaw, but her attention fracturing. "He is Daniel," Yiska said, his English clear and sharp. "Daniel West. His family's wagon was taken many years ago. Our people raised him, taught him our ways. We thought he was Apache, but a coyote raised by wolves is still a coyote." Josie looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet her gaze. His face was a mask of shame and fury. "Nita!" Josie's mind was racing. "He said Nita was his sister." "Nita was his wife," Yiska spat. "And he was forbidden. He was white. He polluted a pure bloodline. When he took her, he was cast out. But she was foolish. She loved him. She followed him." "No," Daniel said, his voice a low growl. You drove us out." "And now," Shaw said, stepping forward, his confidence flooding back. "He was a jackal, sensing a kill. Now you get the whole story." "Shut up, Emmett," Josie warned. "Oh, I'm not the one you need to worry about," Shaw sneered. "Yiska, tell her who really led the Cienega massacre." Yiska pointed again at Daniel. "He did. He and his white man's rage. He couldn't protect his wife, so he took his anger out on your people. The men at the Silver Nita's kidnapping, all a lie. He was the one trying to sell his own wife for whiskey, and when the deal went bad, he killed them all." Josie's head was spinning. That can't be true." "It is," Yiska said. "I have followed him. To see him brought to justice, I made an arrangement with the law." He nodded at Shaw. It was the ultimate twist, the ultimate betrayal. The man she had saved, the man who had sworn his life to her, wasn't a noble warrior avenging his sister. He was a white outcast, a traitor to both his adopted people and his own. A man who had allegedly murdered his own wife and slaughtered a mail wagon. "Daniel," Josie's voice was a plea, "tell me he's lying." Daniel West finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the truth. Not the truth Yiska was telling, not the truth Shaw was selling, but a third, more terrible truth. He is lying," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "But not about all of it." "What?" "My name is Daniel West," he admitted, the words tearing out of him. "I was raised by them. Nita was my wife, and I was cast out. Because I loved her. Because I would not let her go." "Then the men at the Silver S?" "They were slavers," Daniel roared. "But they weren't. They weren't strangers." "Go on," Shaw said, a sick smile on his face. "Tell her, Daniel." "They were Shaw's men," Daniel whispered, the final piece falling into place. Higgins, Lonnie, Wade. They weren't just running whiskey. They were running people. The blood drained from Josie's face. Yiska, Daniel turned to his accuser. You were jealous. You always wanted Nita. You told Shaw where we were. You helped them set the trap. You helped them kidnap your own blood, just to get rid of me. Yiska's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something. Guilt. She was defiled, Yiska hissed. By you. She was no longer Nde. And the Sinega massacre? Josie asked, her voice cold. A lie, Shaw said, shrugging. A convenient one. We needed a reason to hunt him. A big reason. A little wife-killing. People might understand. But slaughtering the US mail? That gets a posse. So this was it. The whole ugly, twisted truth. Emmett Shaw had been running a slavery ring with Higgins. Yiska, in a fit of jealous rage, sold out his kinswoman, Nita, and her white man husband, Daniel. Shaw's men kidnapped Nita to lure Daniel into a trap, likely to silence him. But Daniel, the Apache-raised white man, was more dangerous than they'd counted on. He'd tracked them to the Silver S. He'd killed them. Nita had died in the crossfire. And Shaw, seeing his whole operation and his land grab scheme for the Broken Jay about to go up in smoke, had pivoted. He'd allied with the spurned Yiska, framed Daniel for a different massacre, and come to enforce the law. Josie had carried an injured Apache, but she had really rescued a man at the center of a vortex of greed, racism, and betrayal. You monster, Josie whispered, aiming her rifle straight at Shaw's heart. Now, Josie, Shaw said, his hands inching down. It's 3 against 2, and your warrior here. He's a lie. He is not a lie, Josie said, her voice ringing with clarity. He is Daniel West, and he is the man I saved. Daniel looked at her, his blue eyes, she saw them clearly now, blue as a mountain lake, filled with a terrible, beautiful gratitude. Your oath, she said to him, her gaze never leaving Shaw. Is it real? My oath is real, Daniel said, his voice raw. My name is Daniel. My heart is Apache. My life is yours. Apache or white, that is my law. Good, Josie said, because the sun is coming up, and I'm tired of this. Yiska, seeing his plan, his honor, and his vengeance all turning to ash, let out a war cry. He launched himself not at Shaw, but at Daniel. The world exploded. The world, which had contracted to a tight, poisonous knot of accusation, exploded into brutal motion. Yiska, a man fueled by a lifetime of jealousy and a twisted sense of honor, did not wait for an answer. He saw his carefully constructed trap, his alliance with the white devil Shaw, his public shaming of Daniel, all disintegrating. He saw Nita's choice, even in death, standing beside the outcast. With a guttural war cry that was more pain than rage, he launched himself at Daniel. It was not a brawl. It was a clash of two worlds. Steel rang out in the pre-dawn gloom, a high, singing, terrible sound. The two men were a blur, a vortex of buckskin and fury. They moved with a shared language of violence, a lethal dance they had both learned as boys. Yiska was a storm, all aggression, his knife arm a piston of hate. Daniel, hampered by his still-healing shoulder and the psychic weight of the revelation, was forced on the defensive. He was a stone in the river, deflecting, parrying, his feet digging into the hard-packed dirt of the ranch yard, giving ground, but not breaking. Josie's rifle was up, but she couldn't get a clean shot. The two men were locked together, a tangle of limbs, separating and crashing back into each other. And Emmett Shaw, ever the coward, ever the jackal, saw his moment. His eyes, wide and calculating, flicked from the mesmerizing, deadly duel to Josie. Her attention was divided. Her focus was on the blur of knives. Shaw moved. He didn't run. He dove. A low, scrambling lunge for the gun belt he had so theatrically kicked away. His fingers, scrabbling in the dust, closed around the walnut grip of his revolver. "Josie!" Daniel's voice was a raw shout, torn from his throat as he blocked a vicious slash from Yiska. Josie spun. Time seemed to clot. She saw Shaw. He was on one knee, his face a mask of triumphant, ugly hate. He was no longer the babbling coward. He was the man who ran slaves. He was the man who had ordered Nita's death. He was the man who, in this single second, was going to end everything. He raised the revolver. The long barrel lined up, a perfect dark circle, aimed directly at her heart. She tried to swing the Winchester, but it was too heavy, too slow. "Your ranch is mine, widow," he hissed, his thumb pulling back the hammer with a click that was louder than the entire battle. A sound split the air. Not a gunshot. Not a yell. It was a sharp, clean thwack. Emmett Shaw's eyes went impossibly wide. His mouth opened in a silent O of pure, uncomprehending shock. He looked down at his own hand, the one holding the gun. An arrow, fletched with dark hawk feathers, was protruding straight through his wrist, pinning his hand to the wooden stock of his own gun. He stared at it for a long, frozen second, as if it were a strange insect. Then, the pain hit. He screamed. It was a high, thin, piercing sound, the shriek of a pig in a slaughterhouse. He dropped the revolver as if it were red-hot coal, falling back into the dust, clutching the ruined, bleeding mess of his hand to his chest. Josie, her breath locked in her lungs, slowly turned her head. One of Yiska's warriors, his face as impassive as carved granite, stood 20 yards away. His bow was still half raised. He met Josie's gaze, not with kindness, but with a cold, clear judgment. He spoke, his voice carrying easily in the sudden lull. "The Endi do not fight with men who wear badges." He spat in the dust. "We do not ally with cowards who shoot women. That is his shame." He nodded at Shaw. "Our quarrel is with this." He pointed toward the duel, which had reached its own horrific conclusion. In the moment Shaw had screamed, Yiska had faltered, his eyes flicking to his ally. It was a fatal half-second lapse. Daniel, fighting for more than vengeance, fighting for a future for the woman who had saved him, didn't hesitate. He didn't counterattack. He simply held his ground. Yiska, in his blind rage, lunged one last time, his entire body weight behind the killing thrust. Daniel, in a move of pure Apache training, pivoted, letting Yiska's own momentum do the work. He caught the warrior's wrist, turned the blade, and stepped into the embrace. Yiska impaled himself on his own knife, driven by his own hatred. The men stood locked together for a second, a grotesque statue in the center of the yard. Daniel was breathing in great, shuddering gasps. Yiska looked down at the hilt of the knife buried to the guard in his own chest. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes no longer burning with hate, but glazed with a terrible, final understanding. "She is all free of you, white man," he choked, a bloody froth on his lips. "She is free." Yiska's knees buckled. Daniel held him for a moment, then lowered the man he had once called brother to the dust. A profound, deathly silence fell over the broken jay. The only sounds were the whistling wind, the distant, frantic nicker of a horse, the pathetic sobbing whimpers of Emmett Shaw, and the low, agonized groans of Lonnie, still lying by his horse. Higgins and Wade were dark, still lumps by the barn. Yiska was dead. Shaw was a broken, bleeding creature. The two remaining Apache warriors looked at Daniel, then at their dead leader. Their duty was done. Yiska's blood feud was over, settled by its own terms. With a silent, shared look, they stepped back into the shadows of the arroyo, melting away as if they had never been. Daniel West stood alone in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. His arm was bleeding from a long, shallow gash, but he didn't seem to notice. He looked across the yard at Josie. Their eyes met. A chasm of death, lies, and blood separated them. He was the outcast. She was the widow. He had sworn her his life, and in one terrible night that oath had been paid in full. Josie's gaze broke from his. Her resolve, which had fractured, now solidified. It became a thing of cold iron. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer a pawn. She was the owner of the broken jay, and this was her yard. She walked forward, her boots crunching in the dirt. She ignored the sobbing shore. She walked past the dead Yiska. She stopped in front of Daniel. She didn't say a word. She just looked at the smoking rifle in her hands, then at him. Then, with a purpose that was terrifying in its clarity, she strode over to Emmett Shaw. He flinched as her shadow fell over him. She bent, not to help him, but to retrieve his fallen revolver. She checked the cylinder, then tucked the weapon firmly into the waistband of her skirt. She stood tall, the undisputed master of the field. "The dynamite," she said to Daniel, her voice flat. He blinked, as if surfacing from a deep, dark water. "What?" "In the barn. The dynamite Henry bought. Get it." He, wincing as he moved, did as he was told. He was a man in a daze, and her certainty was a light to follow. He returned moments later with the small wooden crate and a roll of fuse. Josie didn't explain. She walked to Lonnie, the groaning ranch hand. With practiced, efficient motions, she tied his hands and feet and hoisted him, none too gently, back onto his horse. She then marched over to Shaw, who cringed. "What are you doing?" Shaw demanded, his voice a watery plea. I'm a deputy. I'm wounded. You have to help me." "I'm helping," Josie said, tying his good hand to the saddle horn. "You can't. I'm an officer of the law." "You're a slaver," Josie said, her voice like a chip of ice. "And a liar. And a coward. But today, you get to be a hero." She took a stick of dynamite from the crate. She cut a short fuse, lit it from a match she struck on her boot heel, and tossed it through the open door of the barn. "No!" Shaw shrieked, his eyes bulging. "No, that's evidence. That's Higgins." "Exactly," Josie said. She lit a second stick. She walked to the line shack, the place where she had saved Daniel's life, the place where Coda was born. She tossed the dynamite inside. "What?" Daniel started, a look of pain on his face. "We need a story," Josie said, her back to the two small buildings. "And the truth is too complicated. It dies with them." The two explosions were almost simultaneous. Two massive, deafening whoomph that lit the pre-dawn sky, turning night into a hellish, flashing day. Debris rained down. The barn and the shack, the two pillars of her old and new life, vanished in a cloud of fire and splinters. In the flickering demonic light, Josie Biddle walked back to the terrified deputy. She grabbed the reins of his horse. "Here's the story," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "A renegade Apache band, led by a vicious warrior named Yiska, raided my ranch. They were in league with two no-good ranchers, Higgins and Wade, who were trying to steal my land." She looked at Shaw, her eyes boring into his. "You, Deputy Shaw, found out about their plan. You rode out here, alone, to save me. A terrible fight ensued." She pointed to Yiska's body. "You fought bravely, but you were outnumbered. Higgins, Wade, and Yiska's entire band. They were all killed in the fight. They set fire to my barn to cover their tracks. You were grievously wounded, in the hand, trying to save my property. I, Shaw stammered, the new reality being forced upon him. But not before you apprehended the real ringleader, Josie continued, her voice relentless. She pointed to the dead Yiska. He was the one, the Kanega killer, the man from the Silver S. It was all him. But what about him? Shaw nodded his head, his face slick with sweat, toward Daniel. Josie smiled. It was a terrifying, cold smile. Him? Oh, you mean Dan, my new ranch hand. She looked at Daniel. He was here. He fought bravely, alongside you, Deputy. Saved my life, in fact. You'll probably recommend him for a medal, won't you? Shaw understood. This wasn't a reprieve. It was a life sentence. This was the story that let him live, the story that made him a hero and buried his real crimes and his slave-running operation under the bodies of his co-conspirators. Yes, Shaw whispered, his body slumping. The fight was gone. Yes, that's how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. Good, Josie said. She turned to Daniel. Dan, you ride Lonnie here to Fort Grant. He's a witness, in case anyone asks. Tell the doctor he had a bad riding accident. Then you go to the U.S. Marshal. Not the locals, the Marshal. Tell him Deputy Shaw has a full confession about the Yiska case, and he's waiting for an escort. Daniel looked at her, his blue eyes, so clear now in the new light, filled with a mix of awe and something else. He was no longer a warrior. He was no longer an outcast. He was just a man being given a future. And what about Coda? He asked softly, using the name she had given him. Josie looked at the dead Yiska, then at the eastern horizon, which was now a brilliant, bleeding line of rose and gold. Coda died with his honor, fighting the men who killed his wife. Daniel nodded. The comprehension was total. The Apache warrior, Coda, was dead. Daniel West, the white outcast, was dead. Today Dan, the ranch hand, was born. He mounted his horse. He looked at her, one last time, with the eyes of the man she had dragged from the dirt. My oath, he said. It's not an oath, Josie replied, her voice softer. If it's a choice. It is my choice, he said. I'll be back, before sundown. He pulled the reins, turning his horse, and rode east, leading the horse with the wounded, groaning Lonnie. Josie was left alone in the yard, surrounded by the dead, the smoking ruins of her past, and a single, corrupt, and very, very scared deputy sheriff. She sat on her porch, her shotgun across her lap, and watched as the first clean rays of the new sun climbed over the mountains and touched the pale, sweating face of Emmett Shaw. The sun is up, Deputy, she said, her voice quiet in the vast, new morning. And it's a long, long time until sundown. Jocelyn Biddle and Daniel West gave the U.S. Marshal a story that day. A story of greed, betrayal, and a heroic deputy wounded in the line of duty. Emmett Shaw, his hand and his reputation ruined, was transferred to a desk job back east, the threat of Jocelyn's real story keeping him silent for the rest of his life. The Broken J Ranch, now co-run by a tough-as-nails widow and a quiet, watchful ranch hand with blue eyes, began to prosper. They were outcasts, bound not by blood or by law, but by a shared survival and an oath sworn at sunrise. They proved that in a land of dust and death, the most powerful force isn't hate, it's loyalty. What did you think of Jocelyn's choice? Was Daniel's oath a prison or a liberation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These are the kinds of stories that show the true grit of the human spirit. If you were captivated by this story, please show your support by hitting that like button, share this video with someone who loves a powerful drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories every week. Thank you for watching.